Low back pain is the most common cause of work-related disability, and yet, too often we don't realize how important is exercise to prevent and heal it. This chat with Paul Bielak, movement coach and expert in back mechanics, is a great opportunity to talk about that and be inspired.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first interview of my project, Vibes in Action. I'm so excited today to be here with my friend and colleague, Paul Bielak from Prague. Hello, Paul. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm very happy to have you here for the first interview of this project. Paul is an entrepreneur. He is the founder of Advanced Training in Prague, but he is also a martial arts athlete and he's a personal coach. So I think it will be very, very interesting to dive into his story. I think it's very fascinating. So I really would start, Paul, with you. With this question, as I've just said, you're doing so many things. I think you are a multi-passionate professional. So how do you introduce yourself with people? How you define yourself? Coach, entrepreneur, or what else?
Coach, entrepreneur, or what else? I suppose I help people facilitate empowerment, and I try to get the best I can out of them and try to facilitate their personal growth is the way I would frame it. I think from a place of upbringing, I am a martial arts geek that got into fitness and then started to study the science, got hurt along the way, and learned a little bit of rehabilitation. And that whole continuum of experience over 31 years has brought me here today at my 41st year of age.
Okay. So I really would like to step in immediately to one element, which I think is the most fascinating one in your, let's say, professional/personal experience. So you are a martial arts expert and you really have followed your passions throughout different places in the world. So let's share with us, please, a bit about how martial arts are important in your life as an entrepreneur, as a coach, as a dad as well. And maybe why it was so important for you to follow your passion like a kind of globetrotter.
Right, that's a great question, actually. So at about 7 or 8, I told my mom what I wanted to be, and that was samurai. You know, Obviously I had read some book or saw some film, and I was immediately attracted to mainly their sort of unrelentless focus and direction and drive and purpose, and a seeming mastery of self. And this really attracted me. As a kid, I was, really kind of average, weak, skinny, pushed around, bullied a bit. I grew up at the time in communist Poland. And when the regime fell, we moved out. I was 10 years old, and we moved to Canada, which was a huge paradigm shift for me, culturally, changing language. And again, being the outsider, getting bullied and pushed around because I was weird. So in essence, I told my mom, I want to be a samurai. She said, why don't you just try being a doctor or a lawyer or, really
it makes sense, I think.
Get a good education. And God bless her soul, she put up with me over the years. And I've tried various things. I was in police foundations at 19. Have you ever seen the old comedy movie, Police Academy?
Yeah, sure. It's a kind of masterpiece.
Yeah. So that was the exact school and campus I went to in Toronto.
Wow.
It's actually Humboldt College. That's where we shot. And I went from this to randomly being handed a contract to go and become a fashion model in Tokyo.
Okay, wow. Okay.
Completely different world, right?
Okay,
so
sure.
I heard this and I immediately thought Mecca. So obviously Japan and Tokyo was a Mecca for what I was doing and what I was already participating in, my martial arts. I started immediately when I arrived in Canada. So from 10 years onwards, I was training in martial arts obsessively. And
Okay.
I'll let you guess what was the culminating moment. My parents visited somebody and they wanted to get rid of me for a little while as a little kid, right, in the conversation. So they put me in a separate room and they played Bloodsport for me.
Oh.
You remember Bloodsport?
Not really, but I've heard something about it, but tell me something more about that.
One of the cheesiest 80s classics ever, which is still one of the best. And so my life changed instantly. You know, I wanted to be Frankie. And so this obviously went well with this sort of paradigm of getting pushed around and being weak and so on, because a lot of it was about sort of projection of what I wanted to be into the future, as everybody does.
Okay.
Now, at 19, when I came home and I said, Mom, I've just been given a contract to go to Tokyo and you know, be a model. As you can imagine, she wasn't pleased with my decision.
I can imagine.
Explained to her that education is something that I intend to continue moving on with for the rest of my life, whether it's in school or outside of school. There's no question about that. But that this was a life experience that somebody was handing me pretty much for free. And I'm a big believer in, you know, sort of going with the flow when life changes direction.
Sure. A train was passing for you, so.
Yeah. And so after this, you know, I spent 10 years there. And after this, I went into mechanical technician program. Actually, firstly, business management, and then the mechanical technician program in Humber College, which is actually a CNC design and manufacturing program with machine shop and math and so on. It's kind of like the step before engineering. So that, even though I've only done the schooling and worked for 4 years in that area, later allowed me to understand biomechanics a lot better.
Oh, sure.
So you see, life just sort of flows and you go in different directions, but there was that common theme of, you know, wanting to have and find a purpose that was greater than me and become of service to something that was really important. And that for me today is the development of individuals and having some positive influence on their lives, which in turn changes the world in general.
Sure. No, it makes perfectly sense to me because me as well, I've had so different kinds of experiences in Italy and then abroad, and different kind of jobs as well. And you know, at that precise moment, you have the sensation that maybe you're going too far to your passion. Maybe you're losing time. But then, you know, at least for me, every time comes a moment where you have the sensation of connecting the dots, you know, and you know, and so maybe no time is really wasted if you do it with passion, or at least with the sense of building up something. No, it totally makes sense to me. That's very nice to have this thing in common as well. And listen, yeah, tell me.
No, that's just, you know, a thought just popped into my mind. That actually just ties into your original question. So how does martial arts tie into, you know, what I do today? Well, martial arts is everything. It's life. It's facing adversity. It's overcoming your fear. It's literally overcoming the fight or flight response of your nervous system when you're faced with a threat, right? Which was very interesting to me since I was very afraid when I was young. So for me, it was a cultivation of self, but also, you know, it doesn't matter what discipline it is. It doesn't matter if you play piano or if you do martial arts or if you kick a ball. When you get amazing at something because you've put in thousands of hours, that the learning that you get from that on a personal level can now be transferred to anything that you decide to do in life. You know, and I see this time and time again. The people that went and grew up in our martial arts school, they became successful in anything that they endeavored later on in life. So, you know, whether they became lawyers or scholars or PhD professors, or whether they became a realtor.
No, and you know, again, it's pretty nice to me because now it comes to my memory. the fact that, you know, I see a link with my path as well, again, because, you know, I've been a soccer referee. I've been a soccer referee for 8 years. I reached a kind of national level in Italy. So I really went all around Italy with all these matches. And, you know, it's really something which is based on a lot of passion. It can be so hard. It can be so hard because you are alone and you really need to face and to deal with a lot of different situations. And you really feel the only one on one side and all the others are against you, and you need to control yourself. You need to work on yourself. But then you have little by little this feeling, this sensation of growing. And still now, I think I've stopped 15 years ago, something like that. But I still feel that kind of experience was a kind of metaphor of my real life today. And it's something where I really can take something away. And I think I'm stronger, or at least I've grown up a bit more and better thanks to that experience. So I really can understand you, and that's very nice. And listen, in terms of the places you have lived in, because it was Poland at the beginning, if I'm not wrong. So then Canada, Toronto, then Japan, but you even had an experience in Brazil, right?
Right.
So my question, it's so fascinating to me, and I already told you this, but is there something from each one of these places that you took with you? That's the question, just out of curiosity. You know, this different kind of I think social approach, and just curious about that.
Right. You said it. Social approach. Well, as you can imagine, places like Japan and Brazil are alpha omega, very different in culturally.
Can imagine.
Very different characteristics or behavioral traits are valued differently, right? So, giving you a simple example, in Japan, you know, sort of respect and honor and you know, being appropriate and fair are highly valued, you know, and the opposite being looked down at. In Brazil, there are times when you come across a bit more murky ground where what they would call malicia, or malice or malandrage, magic, you know, it's almost like malice or tricking someone is put into the magical realm, and it's seen in the martial arts as well. So you see the value system shifts a little bit all of a sudden. It's about being smart. It's about outsmarting whoever that you're dealing with. And I'm not saying that, you know, Brazilians don't have fundamentally strong values that are positive. I'm just saying that culturally, the perception of something like being direct and honest versus being a little bit sneaky is perceived differently in different circumstances, right? From the Polish side, you know, Polish history, if you look at it, is very brutal.
Okay.
So one of the things I took from my Polish predecessors and the Polish history in general is the ability to basically build up from the ground up at any point in life if there comes destruction and ruin and waste and horror. And that's something that I think is really important for a lot of people trying to get over trauma. So if you look at what happened to Warsaw in the Second World War, I mean, it was leveled. And so when I speak to some of my CEO clients who enjoy working in Poland, I ask them, why do you enjoy the Polish team so much? And they say, well, because these people have this innate sort of drive to achieve anything I put in front of them. And their answer is always, yes, we will. And it doesn't matter how unreasonable. It's just, yes, we will. We don't know how. We'll find a way. We'll do it. We'll execute, and we'll rebuild. And that's a sort of like national character, I think, that I took very proudly from my own culture. The transition between Poland and Canada was really fascinating because I went from literally a communist environment where I had you know, every day I was wearing a uniform in school, and I showed up and I sat in my first day of grade 5 in Toronto, and I put my hands on the table and my ruler and book were 90 degrees to one another, Everything was aligned a certain way. And the kids beside me, they got their feet up, crossed arms, they're eating potato chips, like barely listening to the teacher, right? So this was a huge culture shock for me, and a
Sure.
very big shift in social understanding of hierarchy and so on, right?
So it seems a bit a stereotype, but probably it was true. You are a witness of this.
Right, absolutely. Well, stereotypes are there for a reason, right? Every culture has certain historical context which influences the way that the people behave and think. There's no question about this. You can see it everywhere, right? Stereotypes are there for a reason. Not that we're slaves to them. We have the prefrontal cortex and the ability to make executive decisions for what we want in life, but nevertheless, there are characteristics and traits. So Canada, I consider myself more Canadian than anything today because I grew up there and I spent my teenage years there. So obviously, that has a very heavy influence culturally. Music, TV, certain memes and certain things. Being a child of the '90s, there's a lot of nuance there, obviously. But Canada, in general, is a very, very nice place to live. It's very free culture. We're used to multiculturalism, and we're used to making fun of each other without people taking offense, which is really nice.
Sure. And so what about Brazil? Is something, because I know that you had a very interesting experience even in terms of sports there. So just a few words about that, because again, it's something so curious and fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, actually, Brazil came about through Japan. So let's go to Japan first for a second.
Yeah,
so I'm 19 years old. I fly out. I basically get a contract for modeling and a plane ticket, and I fly out. And I'm met by my agency, and basically they show me to my apartment, and I've arrived at my Mecca. They make me sign a bunch of papers that I will not do contact sports. And of course, the first thing I do, I go and I find myself a dojo. So basically in Japan, I was not only learning the Japanese martial arts, the classic Japanese martial arts, which I had already had a 10-year experience practicing in Toronto, but also capoeira. I actually met a guy at a casting who was teaching capoeira in Tokyo. Through him, I met my Japanese teacher.
Okay.
And I trained there, between Japanese sword class and karate and everything else that I was doing. I was running back and forth to capoeira class, 4 times a week. Basically, I realized that in order to get good at anything, I had to put in the time.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way, to skip the hours that were necessary. And so I asked my Japanese teacher, where in Brazil did you go? Maybe if I spent some time there, I would accumulate a certain amount of hours in practice. He picked up the phone and he called our master, and he says, Mr. Des, could I send the student over? He's really keen and he's consistent. Could he stay with you for some time? And basically the guy just says, yeah, I'll pick him up at the airport. So I got a plane ticket and I flew to Brazil. I arrived. They didn't speak a word of English. I didn't speak a word of Portuguese. I had a dictionary in my hand, and obviously coming from a Slavic language background, Portuguese is alpha, omega on the opposite side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So I got out of the plane and I saw my master's wife. I said, "Oh, bom dia, senora." She just gave me a slap and said, "Hey, senora, nada, vem comigo, vou te ensinar." She threw me in the car, and that was it. They just started talking my head off, and we went to live in Itaguaí, Costa Verde, which is about an hour and a half out of Rio de Janeiro.
Wow, it's so nice. And then Prague.
So Prague is the last place I decided to settle. Prague, there's no Prague without Japan.
Yeah.
I actually met my wife in 2002 on a job in Osaka.
Oh, wow.
We were both with different people at the time.
Okay.
There were sparks immediately, and we didn't capitalize on those sparks for 6 years. But the seed had been planted, and I showed up 6 years later in Prague with an engagement ring in my pocket.
Wow. It's kind of a movie.
Yeah. In many ways, I'm in awe with what life decided to do with me. And the older I get, the less I feel like it's my decisions, and the more I feel it's some sort of strange fate.
That's nice. That's nice. And listen, to jump in the main topic of today's interview and today's chat. So you're now a personal coach, a personal trainer, and if I'm not wrong, your specialty, one of your specialties, probably the most important one, is dealing with back pain, right?
Right.
So my first question for our audience, I think, would be very, very interesting for them to know something more about this. Why, as a professional in this field, you think that back mechanics are so important for people, for common people? Just let's start from here.
Well, I think that back pain is one of the most common musculoskeletal disorders that people encounter today. It is so pervasive that as a trainer, personal coach, or rehabilitation expert, you're faced with it on a daily basis. And we both know why that is. Obviously, the office environment is a huge factor. And now with home office, for some, it's an opportunity to manage their postures, motions, and loads wisely without the scrutiny of peers' eyes. But for others, it's very destructive because it just ends up, meaning that you're working off of your couch or beanbag all day, which can be a disaster waiting to happen. So obviously, back pain is a huge issue nowadays. In the corporate world especially, and a lot of our clients, they're leaders in their given industries, they're CEOs, they're managers, they own companies, so they sit for long periods of time, they travel, they spend a lot of time in postures, motions, and loads, which do not support healthy backs. So this kind of education, I think, is fundamental, and also it's surprising to me that it's not given at an elementary school level. I'm sure you would agree with me that although in school we get relatively good sport coaching, whether it be playing basketball or football or track and field, etc., but nobody actually takes the time in the beginning to teach these kids how to stand, how to walk, how to sit, how to manage their posture. What does good posture mean? How to actually mitigate tissue stress, when you're studying and sitting at home for a long period of time. This isn't given, so a lot of kids, they'll come in, and it's not that they cannot hip hinge, it's that they've never done it before, so their brain isn't used to it. They'll just flex.
Yeah, sure. And going a little bit deeper in technical aspects, could you just enlight a bit the 2 or 3 main reasons why this part of the body, so the back or the so-called core, are so important? Because if you type on Google core training, you found everything. So what is core is not that easy to define, or at least it is not that easy to be coherent. Okay, so what is for you, what is for me? So just some details, okay, more about what is the core, why is so important for you, and why do you think people should really start to think about this part of the body as probably the most crucial one? And already the fact of defining it core, I think it's pretty meaningful, not just mechanically speaking.
Right. So let's start with the word, because a lot of this comes down to semantics and nomenclature, doesn't it? So the word core actually is defined as center. So it's the center of your body, number one. That also means that your core is the center of your mass as far as movement is concerned, right? If I were to stand like this parallel and lift one leg, I'm going to fall off to the side. Why? Because my center of mass, which is just here below my navel, is going to shift because I'm lacking support on one side. Therefore, if I shift my center of mass over to one foot, I can lift the other one without the penalty of falling. So in terms of movement, there's this aspect of a shifting center of mass, which makes movement more efficient and powerful, and so on. On another level, spiritually, you always see that people in various ancient traditions, especially in martial arts, they focus on what's called hara, or your center. This is your will center. So psychologically speaking, your will is collecting here. It also happens to be the visceral area, which is really interesting. From your perspective as an osteopath, you will hear me loud and clear when I say that this is where all the magic happens. This is where you hold your enteric nervous system. This is where you assimilate the energy that you've put into your mouth. So
the solar plex and so on.
I'm sorry?
The solar plex and so on. So many structures there, so important.
Absolutely. So for me, this is, you know, let's say port of arrival of nutrition, which we put into the mouth. And this is coming from the environment that we live in, ideally. And so that environment then nourishes our physical being through assimilation of those nutrients. So that philosophically is a really beautiful cyclical relationship of interdependence with the natural world. So philosophically, the core has a lot of meaning in terms of our own physiology and building up of our tissues and our self and our experience in that environment. And then, of course, you know, as we defecate, we give back to the earth, which then in turn means better harvest and healthier animals and plants and so on. So again, a cyclical nature and center of mass from a, you know, kinesiology perspective or a biomechanics perspective. And then, of course, we've got this idea of resilience and protection. So you have this, you know, what the Chinese might call iron shirt, which supports and protects all of those organs and those vital life systems. And that's where, you know, we get into Stuart McGill's work. Professor Stuart McGill talks about the core as a guy wire system, where you've got, you know, your pelvic floor and diaphragm as a piston with the intra-abdominal air pressure. Around this, you've got your transverse abdominis, you've got your inner and outer obliques in the abdominal wall, creating a number of layers of, you know, as you know, fascia and muscle and so on. And so when they contract in unison, in perfect coordination within the environment of a vertical posture, or let's say an aligned neutral posture, you get this sort of reciprocal effect whereby the strength and resilience of the entirety of your core from all the layers is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that's what we call the guy wire system, which gives stability to the spine, which is kind of like a mast on a boat being attached to the rest of the structures, in our case, the pelvis and the rib cage. And again, it's about a unison. Think of a symphony. There's a number of instruments that have to be in sync in order for the symphony to be beautiful music. And the function of the chorus is very much the same. It's not about the trumpet versus the piano versus, you know, the heart being more important. It's about their integration and the way that they actually function in unison. So that's kind of an analogy for the function of core musculature.
I really love this analogy. I really love this analogy. I think I will use it with my customers very soon. Thank you. That's nice. It's symphony. Yeah, that's nice.
Well, you know, this is the great thing about having conversations such as ours, because there are little things you'll hear that are a very short way to explain to people what you're trying to get at without getting too technical. Is a lot of the time an example is perfect for that.
Sure. And listen, so in terms of back pain, you are a personal coach, very highly qualified, and but I would say you're a coach. I mean, today it's I think the belief, it's still a bit that the fact that you have back pain, you need to see a doctor, you know what I mean, or maybe a therapist. I don't know if you agree with this point, but I really think it's still too easy to see around as this kind of approach. No, I have back pain, okay, orthopedics or medical doctor or, you know, or chiropractor or osteopath. And, you know, I'm an osteopath, so I'm not against this, but I'm absolutely a supporter of the fact that exercise is crucial to prevent and to heal. But yeah, my first question is, do you think this is true? No, the fact that the belief is still not so aligned with the reality in one way. And the second question is why exercise is so important to prevent and heal low back pain.
Okay, so those are two big loaded questions. Let's see.
Okay, we have time.
Where do I start? So in terms of the medical world and this sort of understanding that this is the place to go, I believe it should be. I believe it should be the way that, you know, I have pain, I go to the doctor will point me in the right direction. And many do, and many know what their wheelhouse of experience is and when to reach out and ask another professional for help. So the issue a lot of the time is the limitation of time. So imagine the average person. They have back pain. They have no clue what's going on. They go to the doctor. The doctor has not received a biomechanical understanding of the causes and specific triggers of pain. Or they have been. If they have been, you've got a better chance at success. But if they haven't been, chances are you'll receive an analgesic to relieve your pain in good intent. Of course, this is a short-term solution, as everybody knows. So then you continue going about life in 3D and using your body less than appropriately, and your pain remains. So you seek out, obviously, a movement specialist. That's the obvious thing to do. But many people may not be pointed towards that movement specialist. So they might be told, well, why don't you go get an imaging study of your back, and then you'll go and lie down in the MRI machine or in the CT or whatever it is, and they take a picture and they show you the picture, and they either see something or they do not see something that is wrong with the spine. Now, we know very well that it may or may not correlate to actual pain. So in other words, you could see a spine which has, some sort of changes. Let's call it age. Let's call it use. Let's call it, we don't like words like degradation or degeneration, because that is akin to calling the wrinkles degeneration, whereby it's just age and character and beauty, right?
Exactly.
Maybe experience.
It's physiology.
And physiology, the system is actually changing, but not for the worse. It's changing and adapting in order to function in a slightly different way for the rest of your life. So the body is constantly fluid and changing, as you know. It's never stiff, and it's never rigid, and it's never unchanged. It's always getting better or worse.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's say you get a picture and you see that there's something wrong with the spine. Chances are, if you're talking to an orthopedic, they've been taught how to cut out your pain, and they mean to help you. So inevitably, they're going to reach into their toolbox, which is maybe a surgical procedure, in order to help you. The question begs itself. Does that person have the tools to help you prevent surgery? And is it in their, let's say, career interest to do so? Or are they going to do their job using the skills that they were taught? It's obviously the latter. And some of them will say, well, why don't you go try some physical therapy? Or why don't you go, they'll see something random like, why don't you go try some yoga or some Pilates or functional training or whatever it is. They may have an idea of what that means for that individual, or they may just generally give advice which seem to have helped somebody else.
Sure.
What is often lacking is that individualization of matching that person's genesis of pain to the activity that will help them actually get over their issues. So you get this picture where there's something wrong, or you get a picture where there's nothing wrong, and yet the person's in severe pain. What do you do with that, right? That's obviously the case where you need to go and you need to put your hands on somebody. You need to, gently prod, and you need to pull, maybe traction, maybe move somebody's limb and see what's happening. And then converse with them and understand, is this helping? Is this making it worse? Let's talk in a very simplistic language. Is it better, worse, or same when I do this? Okay, how about that? Did that put you into discomfort? Let's not go all the way to pain, but did that make you uncomfortable? Okay, here we go. Let's change the position. Did that now take away your pain? Yes. Okay, we've now confirmed the mechanism, which was a hypothesis in my mind, causing your pain.
So the importance of assessment, right? I think the importance of passive assessment and assessing the function.
Right.
Right.
And I would also expand that by saying not just assessment in the classical sense of I've done my assessment, I've taken my notes, and I think I know what's going on with this person, but it's a live assessment, meaning they're involved. So they're actually experiencing what you're explaining to them in real time. And you're showing them, when you do this, it doesn't feel good, but when you do that, it feels better. Do more of this and less of that for now. Simple.
Sure.
That way, when you finish, the person can leave. They know what not to do, which is sometimes just as important, if not more important, than what to do. They also know what to do, and they know how to explain to their family in a layman language what it is that's happening to them and how they're going to resolve it. And that's what we want from, you know, a proper assessment and an experience with an individual that comes to us with back pain.
Sure. Yes. Something I always keep repeating in this podcast, but every day in my professional practice, is that awareness and knowledge will save us, no, or will save our customers and patients. And I think it's a bit what you're saying, the fact of being able to listen to your body and to interpret the signals and to understand more and to have the knowledge and the skills to prevent pain and to respect that perfect or almost perfect machine that your body is.
Right. As long as that understanding, knowledge, and skill sets are actually applied in a reasonable way to lead to that positive adaptation. Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good.
Understanding is critical.
Okay, yes, and you know, you have just talked about something which is very important to me in the relation with my patients. You talked a bit about imaging, you know, and what I think about imaging is that a very powerful resource, and that's so obvious, but at the same time, it has a kind of dark side. Why? Because I see pretty often in my practice, people as an osteopath mainly coming to me, and as first thing they do, they don't talk about how they feel as a person, as an individual, how they feel in terms of pain. But the first thing, I have an herniated disc. You know what I mean? And I think
they own their diagnosis.
Exactly. And I think that when it happens, they really become passive in a way. So they really think I can do nothing. Just you as a therapist or a medical doctor can do something because this is the reason why. But what actually happens very often, this is in my experience, is that yes, that this is herniated, but it has nothing or almost nothing to do with your pain because it's not that easy. So I don't think what you think about that, but this is something so important. And every time I dedicate a few minutes in my meetings to share this thing with my patients.
Right. Well, the first thought here is that, you know, I would love to explain to these people that change is bidirectional. So it's not, you're not only going one way in life. And if you have any sort of genesis of pain, chances are you earned it over time. And, you know, we don't mean this in any way to put anybody down. It's what we're trying to say is that you earned it through your management or mismanagement of your own postures, motions, and loads. It's not very often that the actual diagnosis helps to direct the therapy. And that is really the key. If you're going to get an assessment, an imaging study, or an opinion from a professional, you would at least hope that their, let's say, conclusions help direct your therapy. But with imaging studies alone, that's rarely the case because you get some very generalized wording or description, like discopathy or degeneration of something.
Sure.
And what am I supposed to do with that? It just means that I'm broken or I'm faulty, or I can no longer do and enjoy the things that I once did before. It's almost suggestive subliminally when someone gives you a diagnosis of that. And yet, osteopaths, chiropractors, martial arts geeks, whatever, we all have one thing in common, and that is this idea of vitalism.
Sure.
That the body is inherently programmed to improve itself and adapt in order to thrive. Now, that being said, it needs the right conditions, the right mindset, the right environment, and all of the inputs that are required to, as a stimulus, to achieve a positive adaptation. And that's the language that we're speaking with the people who are paying.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And listen, I know I'm posing you a very difficult question, but if you would have 3-4 bullet points to convince people why exercising in a good way, in general, exercising is good to prevent primary prevention, secondary prevention. If you want, you can share with us something about the difference, okay, of the two kinds of preventions, but why exercising is so important to prevent low back pain. 3-4 bullet points.
So there has to be a very simplistic and rational way to explain the necessity of exercise. And it should be quite obvious. Movement is loading. Loaded tissue responds with positive adaptations as long as the load is appropriate, meaning not too little, which will not cause an adaptation, nor too much, which will degrade tissue or break it down. We need to find that exact point between minimal effective dose and maximal recoverable volume. That's where the magic happens, and that's very individual. Everybody has different capacities, different tissue tolerance. So it's a matter of finding the magic elixir for that person, which is why Professor McGill calls this both an art and science. The art is in understanding the human being behind the process, and the science is the understanding of adaptation of tissue and the mechanisms of injury. But it's very simple to explain to people this way. If you get an operation and you lay in your bed for a month, when you get up, you'll feel quite weak. Why is that? And the answer is obvious, because we haven't loaded the system. So therefore, we actually regressed in our resilience, capacity, and so on.
Sure.
A lot of people take, for example, walking for granted, walking or running, right? Everybody can do it. It's natural for, we got it from evolution, and it's a natural sort of state for the human physiology to walk and run. I don't have to think about this, you see, contralateral, no problems. The question is, have you been doing it optimally for years? And do you do it every day optimally? In this case, let's not even think about it. But in the event that you've been sitting behind a desk for some time and your tissues have changed the elastic balance, and now you take that body and you start walking it, and instead of this, you've got this. Now, walking has become a problem, and it's actually causing you pain.
Sure.
So the reason for exercise is to find appropriate movement, which will stimulate the adaptation or adaptive process in our body to create general resilience that we require for our activities, those being life. So for me, I'm approaching somebody's grandma as an Olympic athlete, except her game is not lifting a heavy weight or sprinting fast or throwing an implement. Her game is being able to get up and out of a chair, walk to the store, do some shopping, play with her grandkids, maybe do a little bit of pottery or gardening in the afternoon, and enjoy her life pain-free and fully involved with it.
And
so,
I'm sorry for interrupt you, but I really love this last part of your intervention, and I think that this little story about what our grandma needs is the only probably definition of what they call functional training. If you type functional training on your Google search bar, you can find everything and nothing at the same time, and sometimes you're really, oh my God. So, and I really think that this thing that you have just shared with us is the perfect way to define what is functional training for me, and so probably for you yourself as well. So to train functions.
Absolutely. It's actually our clients who become our teachers in what is functional for them, right? So Professor McGill, he has many decades talking about these topics. And so what I really enjoy about him is that he's really has a very specific wording and specific sort of examples that he uses over and over to get the point across. And he has something that he says about training for a task. He basically says, you look at where the person is, what their capacities and their tolerances are. You look at where they need to be, whether it be gardening or whether it be a full-on UFC, MMA battle, whatever it is, and you train the difference. And that's it. You catalog what you need, you look at what you have, and you train the difference appropriately so you get positive adaptations without degrading tissue. This is really the basis of the work.
Okay. And listen, talking about low back pain or back pain in general, I'm really curious to have your opinion about what do you think about low back pain or back pain and ergonomics. Because, I've just published an episode of Vibes in Action, whose title was Ergonomics Won't Save You. Try really to talk about the false myth of ergonomics, clarifying that ergonomics can be something absolutely good, but it's not the only thing which matters. So in a few words, I really would like to know what do you think about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually just listened to that podcast on the way in this morning, and I'm completely in sync with what you said there. I will start with this. The environment is indeed important if we want to set up our tools in such a way that our body is in a given alignment. There's no question about that. If I'm spending 8 hours plus in this position, there's more than 20 kilos sitting on my neck right now just because I'm looking down. And that's not a problem. We're designed for that. But if I, do that for 8, 10 hours a day for multiple days, it becomes a problem. So it's a cumulative nature. Sure. So with ergonomics, it's a study of the actual environment that we're working within and trying to optimize that environment to mitigate or minimize tissue stress. That's a reasonable train of thought, and I'm behind it 100%. We often have our clients pick up their computers or change postures and motions throughout the day as they work at home nowadays. You've spoken about this quite eloquently. So this is basically our basis of work. However, to your point, ergonomics itself will not work because you could have the world's best ergonomic chair designed by experts based on decades of experience, and yet if you have someone sitting in it who doesn't know how to sit and use that tool, they're going to fail. And so with Professor McGill, he's coined this term evolving ergonomics. And what this basically means is a classic ergonomic study with the added value of the people actually learning how to use their body, what constitutes resilience, how loading over time works, teaching them and giving them the tools to actually be able to manage their own postures and motion and load over time in order to arrive at a positive adaptation versus pain. So it is an education, and it is also a physical discipline or physical habit, which these people are required to perform on a daily basis. It's called the non-negotiable daily back hygiene or spine hygiene, and the big 3 basic exercises for the front, side, and rear of the core. This is basically a way for these people to mitigate their tissue stress throughout the day. So it might mean, I'll give you an example. A very simple example. The person's sitting there like this. Every hour on the hour, they'll get up and they'll put their hands up towards the ceiling, and they will simply mitigate their tissue stress in the opposite direction for a very short time, and they'll go back to work. That in itself gives them a little bit more room or capacity to withstand the tissue stress associated with sitting.
Yeah, and okay, so this concept of back hygiene is something I really like. I found it on your website, and you are now mentioning it again. And yeah, so my question here is, what are, in a way, the pillars, even in terms of knowledge and in terms of content? So you are discussing with a client, back hygiene is important for all the reasons you have just shared with us. But what do you need to do as a client? Then it's specific, it's individual. So just give us an idea of the 2, 3, 4 pillars that you share with your patients, knowing that an individual approach is always the thing people need.
Actually, I thought about this question earlier, and I actually wrote down this morning, just off the top of my head, I wrote down a kind of quick definition of how I would explain back hygiene, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Back hygiene is a modulation of motion and load over time to mitigate tissue stress and prevent injury. It is an ability to use one's own body optimally, causing positive adaptations. So you asked me about fundamental pillars, right? Pillars to build, let's say, a program of back hygiene. Posture awareness, number one, because that influences the way that muscles coordinate and activate. Sufficient resilience. So we say sufficient because I don't need to be, Superman. I just need to be resilient enough that when I open a door, that door doesn't pull on my spine, that I can develop enough stiffness of my core to support my spine so that I'm moving objects as opposed to the objects moving me. Sufficient mobility and stability in the right places. More is not better in every case, right? We need a certain amount of balance between tension and freedom to move. And movement quality, first and foremost. So training functional global movement patterns and teaching the person to coordinate the articulated linkage, which is our body, is of utmost importance. And then finally, what I written down here is consistent and cyclical loading. So load management over time, meaning light days, heavier days, this kind of movement, that kind of movement, and most importantly, suitable movement for the context of your actual life. So considering all the stressors that we're exposed to, choosing the ones that are going to help us with those positive adaptations, as opposed to steal our energy and prowess. So I hope that that's kind of a generalized overview.
It's very, very nice, and I think it could be very, very useful for our listeners. It's something very, very practical, I think, and so this could be probably my last question. But I'm so interested in knowing, how do you deal with motivation? What I mean is, you talk about back hygiene, right? So you need to share with people these need they have to take care of yourself during their everyday life, right? So I think you prescribe some homework and exercises or practices they need to do every day for a couple of minutes. I don't know, maybe you can explain something about that. So my first question, okay, so you confirmed it to me. So given that, how do you deal with the motivational aspect? Because what I think is that in our practice, the fact of convincing people that what they can do for their well-being is crucial and is huge, passes by this this concept of you can do a lot if you are consistent, if you do it on your own. Okay, me, I'm your therapist, I'm your coach, I'm so happy to work with you. Okay, but you can't rely exclusively on me. and you need commitment, and you need to work hard on that. Okay, but you need to motivate them. So how do you do?
That's another fantastic question, David. I'm really enjoying this conversation. First of all, what I'm hearing here is that you and I are dealing with the problematic of outsourcing. And what I mean by that is people oftentimes outsource responsibility to professionals in order to arrive at a desired state. What I mean by that is people will come in to a therapist's office and say, give me a treatment. I'm going to lay here passively. I want you to take responsibility for my pain. I want you to make me better. And this is ultimately why a lot of therapy fails. It's not that the therapist did not do their job correctly. And this is one of the first things I tell people when they come through my door. Did it help? Did you feel better? Yes. How long did it last? 3 days. What did you do between leaving their office and now? Well, I went to work. Something you're doing at work is hurting you. It's not the therapist. They didn't fail you. They had 1 hour versus 8 hours of the following workday multiplied by 7 days that week, let's say, right?
Sure.
So that puts the onus on them and the responsibility in their hands to, again, manage their postures, motions, and loads over time in order to support their therapist's work. It's a cooperation, if you will. The therapist or the trainer is there to educate, to give solutions and tips and some homework, as you said, do their job in terms of bringing the body back to a structural balance. And that's wonderful to do. So motivation requires that the person really has a sense of ownership as far as the process is concerned. I need to give them the tools in order to be able to do their consistent homework every single day. And they need to understand the requirement of their buy-in and their consistent effort, right? That doesn't mean I have to kill the client. Killing the client is the easiest thing that a trainer can do. But we're trying to equip them with the understanding of how what they're doing at home is actually complementing what we're doing together here. So one of the ways that I motivate people is to use examples of successes. And I will often point to the fact that the people were very determined and consistent in their daily homework. This is the #1 fundamental aspect, which is going to help beyond any sort of therapy and any sort of intervention. So the #1 function or the #1 role that I see us having is an educator, informing the people, and then also simply just being that person that they have some sort of accountability to. So I often say, quite humbly, that at least 50% of our effect as a coach, a trainer, or a therapist is simply watching them do their work. They have an appointment, they show up, and they execute. And it's ultimately always about execution. And as our cooperation goes on, we try to make them independent of us in the execution of those appropriately chosen tools in order for them to get better. That is the ultimate goal, to make a client basically not need us anymore. That is where we really feel success. And it's kind of funny because, just last week I had a conversation. Oh, hey, I haven't seen you for a little bit. Should I be keeping open time for you or should I not be? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Hey, it sounds like you found a nice routine for yourself and you don't need me anymore. That's fantastic.
That's great.
Oh, yeah, that's what happened. You don't have to be uncomfortable about that. Just call me when you need me. That's great.
Sure.
I've done my job. It's fantastic. Great. And you know what? That person will send you another 10 people.
Yeah, for sure. I'm totally with you.
Critical.
Yeah, I'm totally with you with that. Sure. And listen, when it turns to homework, so a practice that people need to do on their own, the fact of showing them what they need to do, how they need to do a specific exercise or practice is crucial, I think. So I know that you have a new project, which I find so interesting. So if you want to share it with us, something about training app. So I'm curious if you can share something with us.
Sure. So I'll reveal our new project that's actually about to be released next week. But before that, I'll give you a bit of background. So when I started working with Professor McGill, I quickly realized that he has done so much work in being able to simplify this information for the end user, for the average layman. And I'm sure you're aware of his books, Low Back Disorders and Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance. The latest and smallest book, actually not the latest anymore, but the smallest book for the lay population is called Back Mechanic. And we had the great pleasure of releasing this book in Czech Republic,
Oh, wow.
as well as in Poland, and actually doing some of the corrections for it. The reason that we did that is because this book struck me as genius in its simplicity. And in fact, Professor McGill talks about that it was actually the most difficult project for him because, being a scientist, he goes into the depths of the topic. But to make it accessible for people, he basically wrote this book, which is about 160 pages or so. And it's basically everything you need to know about mechanisms of pain, the most, let's say, common causes of pain, how to test yourself, and what to do about it. And so all of these basic spine hygiene tools, as well as the big 3 non-negotiables, are in there. And by that, we get great results because later on, when they go through the book, they realize, oh, this is what he was talking about. Oh, and this is the principle. That's why he asked me that question. So this has really been a great help.
And sorry, Paul, this is obviously available in English as well for our audience.
Right. So Back Mechanic is available in English. In Europe, you can order these at Mark at BackFit Pro. There's a link on our website to Mark Beavers in Europe. He sells the English version. I'm responsible for the Czech and Polish versions in this region. And so this is a great work that's really helped our process. Now, that being said, oftentimes we were having a situation where the person left that day, perfect form, knowing exactly what they're going to do, and they come back to us. I like to see a person after the initial consult for an additional, let's say, 2 months, once a week, more or less 10 hours total. The reason for that is most often people will come back and they'll say, yeah, that exercise wasn't really for me, or yeah, it was good for a few days, but then it got a little worse and now I'm a little bit triggered. And some of these people are quite sensitized and they have a very low margin for error. And then I'll say, well, show me your routine, and I'll step back and I'll watch, and inevitably they're out of place on one of the exercises. There's a disbalance in the exercise. Their leg is too high. They're driving themselves into hyperextension. Their head is dropping. Their shoulder blades are not stable, whatever. And I always tell them, it's not about the exercises. It's about how you execute the exercises and what's in here, right? So I'll teach them again, and I'll use an external cue so that they can cue themselves at home, for example. And then they'll go, and then they'll come back, and then they'll do, the same mistake. And I'll say, well, what happened? I just showed you this external cue. Oh, I forgot about that. Years of this literally led us to the point where we said, I need to have a resource whereby that person has the most important points right in front of their face when they need it. And that led us to build an app. So the app is super simple. It is the ultimate Mickey Mouse app. There's nothing fancy. There's no fancy functions. There's nothing. You download the thing for free, and it's coming out next week. It's called the Advanced Training App. And there's basically 2 sections, side by side. One is basically a section of free tips, hints, and tricks. These are just very generalized sort of principles, techniques, or tools that will help a pained person or a person just sort of learning about their body or starting out as a layman. Again, our audience is the lay population, so I'm not trying to show off about my knowledge in front of the training community.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to show how many ways can I, train, and how many exercises do I know, and this is about the added value that we can send our clients away with when they finish working with us. So essentially, we wanted something in the palm of these people's hand that will remind them of the fine details of the form as they're trying to execute on their daily non-negotiables. And so we thought, well, obviously an app, because most of the time when this happens, we take a video, we speak to the video, and we tell them the fine points that they need to keep an eye on or keep their mind on, and then we send them away. Well, I thought, wouldn't it be easier, instead of writing, or creating Excel spreadsheets at 11:30 at night after a 15-hour day, wouldn't it be easier to just go into a back end and just go click, drag, click, drag, click, drag, certain exercises that I know are appropriate for that individual. And on their end, they hit their phone and it just opens up and it's right there. And it's in a 1-minute format. So few seconds, you see an exercise done, you see a movement, it takes 10 seconds, and then there's a short paragraph description as to the cueing that the person has to keep in mind. So they can execute by looking at the photos and seeing our, the volume and the rep count that we filled in from our side. They can just execute it. There's a little timer in it. Or they can click on the video to remind themselves if they had forgotten the exercise. So that was the only purpose behind this app. And so we've now got hundreds of exercises on our end. The person doesn't get those exercises when they download the app. They only get the actual tips and hints. But when they engage in a 1-hour consult with us, we've now understood who they are, how their body functions, and what they want to achieve, right? Those are the main fundamental pillars. Based on this, we can actually program as a coach the appropriate and time-conducive tools to reach those adaptations. So in other words, think of an average app. You go in, you put in your age, your height, your weight, your subjective, assessment of your own, fitness level, and boom, you get your customized, individualized program. And that's great. And there's many great apps like that out there. And we're not even trying to compete against those because our approach is that of human contact and then a little bit of automation.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it is a very smart and idea, and I think it will be a success. So congrats for this new project.
One last thing, if I could just make mention. There's in our space, there are a lot of disciplines. There's a strength and condition world. There's a personal training and functional training and therapy, various modalities of therapy. I just really feel that we need to be talking to one another the way that we just did today, and having productive conversations, having constructive conversations, and most importantly, we need to focus on what we have in common, because the one thing is that we are trying to enhance lives. And oftentimes there's so much scuttlebutt over, what's the best methodology? Is it this type of therapy versus that type of therapy? And this is really, for me, an area of irritation because it misses the point. It misses the context completely. In trying to justify one way over another, we really miss out on the clinical and scientific rationale and reason. As we've mentioned, there's many tools. When a tool matches the actual genesis or dysfunction, the genesis of pain or dysfunction, then you've got success. If you pull out the wrong tool for the job, you have no success. That has nothing to do with approaches. So one of the reasons I was really drawn to Professor McGill's work is that it was born of a scientific endeavor, looking into function and observing, really with no initial intent for clinical practice, but consequently over the years, as questions were asked and answered in the clinical world, it became, let's call it a methodology. But really, it was a scientific endeavor. And this is really important that we keep that in our minds as professionals, that there is a wheelhouse of experience based on what we've done. And then when we get beyond that, having the character to tell someone, I don't know.
Yes.
But I know a guy who does, and let me pick up the phone right now and we'll get the answer for you. And together, you're going to do a lot better in a very short space of time. We'll shortcut your process. That's what our industry really desperately misses. We need to unify and sort of, understand that we are a community that is vastly more similar in principle than we think, despite variety of techniques and approaches.
Thanks a lot for this exciting chat. It was so nice for me. I really think it can be useful for my and our audience. And it was so nice, and I really had good time, me as a friend and as a professional. It's always so inspiring to share information or other kind of stuff around our work, which is our passion as well. So thanks a lot from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. Last time we spoke at Dr. Craig Liebenson's
Yes.
schooling here in Prague, I immediately understood that you are of the same mind and spirit, and your heart is in the right place, and you're willing to do the work, and you give it your all. So I'm absolutely honored to be here speaking to you today. It was a great pleasure. I hope that some of the things and topics that we touched on today could help inspire or motivate our listeners.
Thanks a lot again, Paul, and
Thanks so much.
hopefully see you soon in person.
All the best, and likewise, looking forward to having you here in Prague.
Sure, with pleasure.
Take
Bye-bye,
care,
Paul.
Bye-bye.